I'm Lana Pine, Senior Editor of The Educated Patient, and welcome to our fourth episode of Let's Talk Nutrition with Nico. I'm joined, as always, by Nico Saraceno, the Senior Editor of NO. Good to see you, Nico.
Yeah, good to see you too, Lana. We're rolling here. I feel like our cadence has been so good with these episodes and this consistency. And yeah, we've been trying to get creative with these shows. So I feel like episode 4 is gonna take kind of like a different perspective that the first 3 haven't really taken so far. So it should be interesting.
Well, please explain how so.
Okay, so this episode is more, or I should say less about like an ingredient or a condition. Instead, it's more about how like nutrition science is getting communicated to the masses. So I kind of want to dive into an interview I did with a man by the name of Dr. Harry Rice. He's actually the VP of Regulatory and Scientific Affairs at GOED, which is the acronym for the Global Organization for EPA and DHA Omega-3s. So I guess in a nutshell, we mostly talked about like supply chain issues and things like that. But he also brought up something that I think both your and my readers are going to find really relevant.
What was that?
Well, he got into a lot of content. I think the main highlight was that he mentioned a couple studies that surprisingly received a lot of negative press recently from earlier this year. So there's one on cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease, and the second on TBI, which is short for traumatic brain injury. So in essence, both concluded that omega-3s didn't show a benefit. But the issue was that the headlines pretty much decided to run with omega-3s not showing a benefit at face value without providing any context.
Well, I feel like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. He couldn't have thought that that was like the whole picture, right?
No, and I haven't spoken to Harry many times, but he's like a very passionate guy and he loves what he does. He's been with GOED for I don't even know how many years. I believe over a decade at this point. And I think it's important to say that he wasn't necessarily disputing the results because the clinical trials, I mean, the data says it all, right? But he said the conclusions the researchers drew were fair given the study design, but he did point out real limitations. So, for example, in the first study I mentioned, the Alzheimer's study, he noted that the cognitive assessments that were used, they weren't really appropriate for the population that was being studied or for how the condition was progressing, like how to track the condition itself. So the issue there was that the tool itself that was being used, it may not have been sensitive enough to pick up a real effect per se, even if one existed. So there could have been kind of like some holes in the cracks there. So he pointed that out, which I thought was like an important thing to note.
Yeah, that's a pretty important distinction that those headlines didn't capture.
Yeah, it was. And I think that's the point of this episode, to not really dive too much into the studies. I mean, a study can be, don't get me wrong, it could be well conducted, and even with all that time and, the organization, it could still have a limitation that's affecting how much weight the conclusion deserves. And it creates a snowball effect too, right? It's like by the time the news hits social media, it's just omega-3s don't work and that's it. They don't say due to so-and-so, due to limitations in the study design. It just says clear, cut, and dry, omega-3s don't work. And obviously that's not a good look if there's not like a reasonable explanation behind it.
Yeah, I mean, we see that all the time on The Educated Patient. I've written about it before. Patients see one headline and they just run with it, what they ask their doctor. And even sometimes they put it above doctor's guidance.
Yeah, and that's not necessarily their fault either, right? They're following their healthcare provider. They're tracking what they see in the media. Rice actually mentions that his organization GOED, it has to actively decide and decipher which stories are getting enough traction that they need to step in with talking points for their members, because they have over, I think, 100 members, and it's assumed that they're going to start asking questions, rightfully so, right? So it's not necessarily that they're responding to all inquiries and all stories that come out, because that would probably be a lot to track. It's just that some stories get picked up more widely enough that member companies are like, oh, shoot, I'm starting to have to field questions from customers. Like, what am I going to do about this? How do I approach it? What is the right way to keep customers' minds and their stress levels like at ease? Because, of course, everyone's going to be freaking out about like crazy headlines that promote this stuff, you know?
Yeah, 100%. Did he draw any comparison to where the evidence is actually strong?
He did, actually, and I thought this was like a nice, important, useful contrast to bring to light. So he was very direct in our chat when he said that the evidence for omega-3s and heart health, actually, in his words, I quote, is incredibly strong, which is much stronger than for other areas of cognitive health, where he said the signs in those other areas, they're still emerging, although it's stronger in some areas than others. But the connection between omega-3s and heart health was a huge one. So it's important to clear up that it's not like all omega-3 research is necessarily shaky. It's that the strength of the evidence, it really depends on which outcome you're asking about. So it's kind of like a loaded question, because the field of omega-3s, like, they cover so many different data points and things like that. So you have to really be specific as to what you're looking for. So it really just depends on what you need.
Yeah, well, that seems like a good takeaway for a consumer audience, that the same ingredient can have really solid evidence for one use and then not as much for another.
Yeah, and I think that's very relatable. I mean, you see that with, I mean, on the, not to get into it, but on like the medical side as well. You know, there's certain side effects that might treat and certain others it won't. So I think when it comes to like our audience, like for manufacturers specifically in this space, you just gotta be precise about the claim you're actually making, especially in nutraceuticals. You gotta say, okay, what is it backed by? You know, instead of letting the ingredient's overall reputation carry an application the data doesn't fully support yet, back it by the claims that you know are valid, and just leave it at that. Let the data speak for itself. I think that's important to point out. And I know we didn't get into it too much, Lana, but we'll be also throwing those links to the studies that I spoke to Dr. Rice about. I'll throw those in the description as well. So if any of our audience wants to check those out for themselves, they can go ahead and take a look.
Okay, awesome. Well, I think that this is a really good reminder for people to kind of slow down when they see a headline like that, not react, do their research. I think this was a really good one.
Yeah, this was really fun. Thanks for having me again, Lana. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time, and we'll see what else we can come up with for the future episodes. It's gonna be fun.
Absolutely.